The morning I decided to put the old John Deere back together felt like I was waking up a life I'd parked in a shed. The engine coughed. The sun was barely over the ridge, and for a second everything smelled like dirt and diesel, and the one thing I'd always known how to fix. Then Marjorie Blake rolled up in her immaculate SUV like she owned the sunrise, clipboard in hand, and that look people get when they think they're the center of a small universe. And in 3 sentences, she managed to make me feel like the one thing in town that needed fixing. That's how this started, with a polite knock that wasn't polite, in a neighborhood that prefers hedges to history. My name's Luke Harper. I'm 42, raised on this patch of land where my dad kept chickens and my mother planted tomatoes in a stubborn row every spring. I came back after a decade away not because I wanted drama, but because the house was in my blood and the fields had a way of calling you home. Willow Ridge is the kind of place where property values are a religion and the HOA newsletter is Sunday scripture. Marjorie had been president for 8 years, and she ran that little council like it was a kingdom she'd inherited, and anyone who threatened the view or the uniformity became a problem to be corrected. At first, it was small stuff: a flyer tucked under the porch mad about violations, a note taped to my mailbox calling my fence unsightly, a neighbor's complaint about the tractor being on the street. People who don't sleep with the land forget how loud the world can be when someone wants to push you out. I smiled, I waved, I answered the letters with receipts and civil language. I thought facts would be the antidote: survey records, permits, a polite letter from an old army buddy who happens to be a lawyer. Turns out, facts are a slow currency when pride and power are spending like wildfire. Marjorie had reasons, or at least she told people she did. Value, she said at the HOA meeting, eyes scanning the room, letting the word land like a stone. Property values. But there was more. She'd been on the board long enough that influence stuck to her like dust, and she liked being the one who decided what fit looked like. Maybe she resented my family for not selling. Maybe she feared anything that didn't match the catalog of manicured yards and matching mailbox flags. Or maybe, somewhere under that prim smile, there was envy. My land was wild. It mapped to a life she couldn't see herself living. Motives can be ugly, and they don't need to be tidy to be true. When the harassment escalated, it did so with a kind of theatrical cruelty. Tires slashed on a spring morning, a fence post sawed at night, anonymous posts on the community page that called me an eyesore and a liability. Somebody spray-painted the word "NO" across my old barn door, big, block letters, like a verdict. I started installing cameras, nothing dramatic, just a couple of weatherproof units that blinked red in the corner of the yard. I'd been in situations where proof mattered, and proof tends not to be very dramatic unless you let it be. So I let the cameras do the talking. The mid-afternoon that changed everything looked, from a distance, like a glitch in a small town's afternoon. Marjorie's SUV rolling down the lane too fast, the camera catching license plate, the bumper grazing the tractor, a rock thrown that cracked a headlight. I remember the sound like someone opened a tin can behind my ear, metal on metal, a hard thunk, and then Marjorie out of the vehicle, face like thunder, pushing her clipboard in my direction as if I'd stolen a dog. She yelled. I yelled back. She said I'd shattered the rules. I said she'd hit my property. Her supporters came out with their chorus of cultivated outrage. The video, unedited, timestamped, told another story. It showed intention where she claimed accident. It showed a woman who decided to take enforcement into her own hands. What matters in a town like this is what the neighbors think, and what matters to the law is what you can prove. So I took the footage to Deputy Riley Park, good, professional, practical, and I put a flash drive in his hand and watched a man who'd listened to too many variations of the same old feud sit very still. Riley didn't shout, didn't grandstand. He took my statement, he watched the footage, he wrote it down. Later, when I handed a copy to Sam Ortega, a local attorney who'd known my father, Sam's first words were, "We don't file for the headline. We file for the record." I like that. Records don't forget. We started to dig. Public records are like old letters. They reveal intentions you can't unwrite. I pulled easement agreements, the HOA charter, minutes from old meetings. We found discrepancies, fees that didn't match, votes that didn't have signatures, a bank account with contributions unaccounted for. It wasn't a Hollywood conspiracy. It was smaller and more dangerous because it was plausible. A few people bending rules until the whole board smelled like compromise. The weaponization of a neighborly organization is rarely violent at first. It's paperwork, it's bylaws, it's the slow strangling of someone who looks different. The emergency meeting was electric. Marjorie arrived as if she were presiding over a coronation, but the room was different than she'd expected. People had seen footage, friends, strangers, the quiet couple who'd never said a word at a meeting, but who now sat with their arms folded. I didn't stand and shout. I put a thumb drive into the projector and let it play. There's something unnerving about seeing your own life in a little rectangle on a wall, and there's something more unnerving about watching a person's mask slide off when a camera refuses to lie. The room shifted. Where there had been polite applause and nods, there was murmur and then questions. Of course, Marjorie fought back. She filed a restraining complaint. She gathered signatures. She rallied the people who still preferred the picture book version of Willow Ridge. She said I was the troublemaker, that my rural lifestyle was an affront to the community. Her words were sharp, practiced lines that landed in the ears of the undecided. I had to be careful. I wasn't trying to tear a neighborhood apart. I was trying to be allowed to live on the land that my family had cared for. The judge in the small claims room smelled of coffee and old paper. Sam laid out our stack. Time-stamped video, repair bills, eyewitness statements, a ledger showing HOA spending that didn't line up. He told the story the way a good lawyer tells it, without theatrical flourishes, but with every fact lined up like fence posts. The ruling wasn't a cinematic mic drop. It was a judge reading, a pen scratching, a name being crossed off the title list, and an order for restitution and an audit. It was workmanlike, and in a way, that's what justice often looks like when it isn't television. The board was forced to step down. An audit opened windows into the finances, and people who had been complicit found themselves answering questions they hadn't expected. For me, it wasn't victory so much as a settling of accounts. I didn't dance in the yard. I repaired the tractor and painted the fence. The point wasn't a public defeat of someone else, it was reclaiming ordinary life. But endings are messy. Even after the judge's order, a few neighbors kept their distance, and Marjorie left town with her head held high, convinced she had been right in spirit if not in court. The HOA reformed, to a degree, new bylaws, more transparency, a board that included the quiet couple and a young teacher who wanted to start a community garden. Some people thought that was enough. Others wanted blood. The thing about small towns is that forgiveness and grudge often share the same porch. If there's something I learned, it's that the center of conflict is rarely the thing you see on the surface. This wasn't about a tractor or a fence or a cracked headlight. It was about who gets to define what a community is and who gets to be comfortable with an answer that includes someone else's mess. It was about the courage of neighbors who decided to look at a hard clip of footage and choose truth over convenience. It was about the soul-deep stubbornness of a man who didn't want his life to be summarized in a HOA newsletter. So now I fix what needs fixing. I plant tomatoes in the same stubborn row my mother planted, and when I pass the new board members at the coffee shop, we nod. Sometimes we talk. Sometimes we don't. The barn door has a fresh coat of paint, and someone not me planted a tree at the end of the lane. I still think about Marjorie sometimes. People like her don't vanish so much as they become stories. And stories are complicated. They make you feel righteous sometimes and embarrassed other times. That's human. I want to hear what you think. Have you ever lived next to rules that felt less like community and more like control? Do you think neighborhoods should have the power to police personal choices when property values are at stake? Drop a comment below and tell me which side you'd take, the person protecting the look of the neighborhood or the person protecting their right to a life that doesn't fit the brochure. Share this if you think neighbors should be honest with one another. And if you've got a similar story, I want to read it, because the best way to keep a place like Willow Ridge honest is to make sure these conversations happen out loud.